Hi everyone, welcome back to the History of Football channel. Today I'll be doing another video and this one is going to be every Premier League club's worst ever loss. And when I mean worst ever loss, I mean in their entire history, even before the Premier League. It could be a cup game, could be a Champions League game. It's just their worst loss ever in general. So I'm going to be looking at every 20 of the Premier League clubs and I'm going to be detailing their worst ever loss. With this list as well, I'm going to be going in alphabetical order as the teams would line up if they started the season. So I'm going to go from A to Z. So I'm going to be starting off with the first club, which is Arsenal. Arsenal are one of the most successful clubs in England historically. They've got a long, proud history. They've got the longest stay in the top flight currently. But their worst ever loss come on the 12th of December 1896, where they were beaten 8-0 by Loughborough. So that remains their biggest ever loss in their history. Aston Villa are another club with a very proud history. Lots of trophies that they won. They're one of the biggest clubs in England and they've also won the European Cup. But their worst ever loss come on the 23rd of December 2012, where they were beaten 8-0 by Chelsea. And this was a Chelsea team that had won the Champions League just the season prior. With Bournemouth, in the last 20 years or so, the club has come from leaps and bounds. They've gone all the way from the bottom of the 4th division all the way up to the Premier League, and they've also had some spells in the Championship. But their worst ever loss come on the 18th of December 1982, where they were beaten 9-0 by Lincoln City at home, and that remains their worst ever loss as a club. One of the newer teams in the Premier League, Brentford Football Club from West London they're having a good spell in the Premier League since they've been promoted from the Championship, but their worst ever loss come on the 27th of December 1911. They were beaten 9-0 at home by Coventry City, and that's when Brentford were in the first division, so that remains their worst ever loss. And now we're down on the south coast with Brighton and Hove Albion. They're having a fantastic year. They could potentially get one of the European places. But their worst ever loss come on the 25th of December 1940. It was a wartime game against Norwich City and they lost 18-0. So that's one of the worst losses I think any team on this list has faced. So 18-0 is their worst ever loss against Norwich City back in 1940. And now we're back in West London with Chelsea. Chelsea not having the best season this year. They're currently 12th after Crystal Palace won the day. But their worst ever loss come in September 1953, where they were whacked 8-1 by Wolverhampton Wanderers. Of course, back in those days, Wolverhampton Wanderers were one of the best teams in England. And Chelsea weren't at that stage, but that remains their worst ever loss, 8-1 against Wolves. And we remain in London with Crystal Palace. Crystal Palace are now an established Premier League side, but their worst ever loss, there's two of them actually, they're equal. Their record league defeat was a 9-0 loss against Liverpool on the 12th of September 1989, and also they were beaten 9-0 against Burnley in the FA Cup on the 10th of February 1909, so that remains their two worst ever losses, tied 9-0 apiece. And now we're in Merseyside with Everton. Everton have suffered their worst defeat 3 times with the same scoreline. In 1934, they were beaten 7-0 by Sunderland. In 1939, they were beaten 7-0 by Wolverhampton Wanderers. And then on the 11th of May 2005 in the Premier League, they were beaten 7-0 by Arsenal. So that's their worst ever loss, 7-0 by 3 different teams. And now we're back in West London with Fulham. Fulham having a good year this year in the Premier League, but their worst ever loss come on the 23rd of September 1986. It was a League Cup Round 2 game and they were beaten 10-0 by Liverpool. So that's their worst ever loss in the club's history. And now we're on the Leeds United. Similar to Everton, they've suffered some defeats with exactly the same scoreline. So in 1934, they were beaten 7-0 by Stoke City. Then they were beaten 7-0 on the 4th of September 1979 by Arsenal. They were also beaten 7-0 by West Ham United on the 7th of November 1966. And then on the 14th of December 2021, they were beaten 7-0 by Manchester City. So they've suffered a few 7-0 defeats, but nothing ever worse than that. Leicester City, with them, their worst ever loss come on the 21st of April 1909 when they were known as Leicester Foss. and they were beaten 12-0 by rivals Nottingham Forest. So not a good day out for Leicester Foss at the time. Of course, they're known as Leicester City now, but 12-0 is one of the worst ever losses, I think, in the top division of English football. And now with Liverpool, one of the biggest clubs in the world, one of the most successful clubs in the world, but their worst ever loss come on the 11th of December 1954. They were beaten 9-1 by Birmingham City when Liverpool were in the second division. So that remains their worst ever defeat in the club's history. And now we're on to Manchester City, the current Premier League champions. Their worst ever loss has been an 8-goal margin, which has happened to them 3 times in their history. Or should I say 4 times actually. They were beaten 8-0 by Brighton Wanderers on the 26th of December 1894. Then they were beaten 8-0 against Wolverhampton Wanderers in 1933. They were beaten 9-1 against Everton on the 3rd of September 1906. And finally, they were defeated 10-2 against Small Heath on the 17th of March 1893. So they've suffered 4 defeats by 8 goals in the club's history. Now we're on to Manchester United, one of the biggest clubs in the world. They've suffered a defeat by 7-0 on 4 occasions. They were defeated by Blackburn Rovers in 1926, 7-0. Aston Villa in 1930, 7-0. Wolverhampton Wanderers when they were in the second division in 1931. And most recently, 5th of March 2023, they lost against their arch rivals Liverpool 7-0. So they've been beaten by 7-0 on 4 occasions. With Newcastle United having an amazing season in the Premier League this year, currently coming 3rd, but their worst ever loss in the club's history come on the 15th of April 1895, where they were beaten 9-0 at home against Brighton Wanderers when they were in the second division. So that remains Newcastle United's worst ever loss. And now we have Nottingham Forest back in the Premier League after, I think, 24 years they were outside the Premier League. Their worst ever loss come on the 10th of April 1937. It was a second division match against Blackburn Rovers, and they were beaten 9-1 at home, and that remains their record league defeat. Now we move on to Southampton, who I think won't be in the Premier League next year, but you never know, things might change. But their worst ever loss in the club's history, they've been more recently. On the 2nd of February 2021, they were beaten 9-0 by Manchester United. And then on the 25th of October 2019, they were also beaten 9-0 by Leicester City. And that remains Southampton's worst ever losses in their club history. And we move into North London with Tottenham Hotspur. And this one's unique compared to every other team on the list. With Tottenham Hotspur, their worst ever club defeat, it weren't against an English opponent. It actually came against FC Köln from Germany. It was in the UEFA Intertoto Cup competition. On the 22nd of July 1995, Tottenham were beaten 8-0, and that remains their worst ever loss in their history. And now we're in East London with West Ham United. Their worst ever losses, they've been beaten 7-0 on 2 occasions. The first come on the 1st of September 1919. They were beaten 7-0 away from home at Barnsley. And then on the 28th of November 1959, they were beaten 7-0 by Sheffield Wednesday. And that remains West Ham United's worst ever loss. And finally, we're in the West Midlands with Wolverhampton Wanderers. Their worst ever defeat come on the 15th of October 1892. They were a Division 1 match against Newton Heath, which later became Manchester United, and they were beaten 10-1. So that remains Wolverhampton Wanderers' worst ever loss. So that concludes my video today on every Premier League club's worst ever defeat in their history. I hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you learned something about your club or another club and their worst ever loss. But once again, I'd like to thank everyone that's recently subscribed to the channel and everyone that's been following me pages on Instagram, Facebook and TikTok. It's been much appreciated. I recently got over 500 followers on Facebook, which I thought was a little bit of a mini milestone, but I'll be putting out more videos in the future. And thanks to everyone that watched my recent video about Darwin Football Club. If you're interested in following me on social media on my other platforms, I'll put a link in the description below for those. But this has been History of Football, signing off for another video, and I'll catch us all later in the next one. Alright, tatty bye for now.